Alright, welcome to another video where we're going to go over the rest of this section of the debate from Jordan Peterson versus 20 atheists. This one gets a little bit tricky to understand, so I'm going to come in and try to simplify things for you guys. But essentially, Jordan Peterson veer things off a little bit, and like I said, it gets so annoying with the fact that this guy just does not answer the questions properly, and this guy in the white has to continuously tell Jordan Peterson, can we get back on the question that we originally had? And Jordan Peterson just doesn't listen.
In a sense, yeah, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we?
Literally, like, again, he's just asking another question that doesn't relate to the initial question. This guy in the white has to continuously push him back on track.
Go back. Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just
See, even the audience is like, what? No, we're not. We're not on the same initial question that we had, and now we're just going on a rant.
uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
He literally quite is throwing spaghetti at the wall. Even the audience is laughing because they know that he is throwing spaghetti at a wall.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and
See, just asking more and more questions aside from the initial question. And now he's just going around without even answering that initial question. It's like answering a question with a question. No, stop it, JP. Stop it, Jordan Peterson. Just answer the question.
what's false? So you could
I
imagine
infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right and wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
Is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah, like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I guess, see, this kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that
as,
way.
as I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way.
Jordan Peterson is just basically at this point just saying another source and another source and another source just to throw this guy off from answering a question or moving on to the next subject. He's just trying to stall the time. There's like 2 minutes left on the clock for this guy to get through his conversation, and people are just like Jordan Peterson here, just trying to throw him off.
And it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old
Okay.
Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God, and that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the
I'm
Mona
defining
Lisa.
God as conscience.
Okay. So that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament,
Okay,
in
so
Elijah and in Jonah.
sure. So whoever, so
It's
some.
not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets,
All
right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not our.
Jordan Peterson just getting upset at this point. The guy is just trying to answer his question, but Jordan Peterson is just continuously interrupting him, not letting him speak. And honestly, that's kind of annoying from someone who decides to debate with other people, and it's just stalling the clock at this point.
Arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand what they're rejecting. You accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because, again,
I asked you if you believe that
you-
conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question, and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting,
Exactly. This entire section, Jordan Peterson is just interrupting this guy.
you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not in the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these
Like how this guy's just sweating, like what is even going on at this point? And I can completely relate to this because I'm just sitting here and looking at this debate going, what are they even talking about at this point? This doesn't even relate to the very first question that was asked.
polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you.
Nice
I appreciate
to meet
the
you
conversation.
Too. Yeah. It's very brave of you to do this.
Thank you.
Surrounded is now.
All right, so this is going to be the end of the video, guys. Let me know what you think. I do think that Jordan Peterson really just answers a whole lot of nothing with nothing and then asks a question back in order to prevent himself from giving a stance on something. And I think that's kind of not the right way to go about this, especially when you have people, seems like they're more of a younger generation who are just trying to ask these questions. And Jordan Peterson is more of like, kind of like the priest here who's kind of just saying, trying to preach in a sense, but also you're going to preach, you got to preach with the right answers. But he's just asking a question back. He's not really answering their questions, which is why I can see these atheists are getting upset with him because they're not trying to answer another question with a question. They're just trying to understand where he's coming from. But Jordan Peterson won't let them understand. Let me know what you guys think. I'll do part 4 tomorrow.